to Mr. Cridlin, and I don't think what my question is not necessarily on this report, but certainly has to deal with his department. I have two parks in my ward.
Well, Councillor Wells, I'm sorry, but if it's something that's on here, it should be something that's on here. If it's something more, again, specific and detailed that's outside of this report, maybe it should be brought up on either under other business.
As long as it gets on the report somehow, and I get an answer, I don't give a rip-roaring Christmas how it gets there.
Well, is it in here, in this report? If it's not, then it shouldn't be discussed.
I didn't see it, but it's certainly something that I have asked several times about.
Okay,
And maybe it should have been on there.
but it's not. So let's move on to Councillor Brunton.
Well, first of all, I'm going to say this, and I'm sorry to the county administrator that I disagree. Here's a report with a bunch of projects in it, and I feel if we have questions, what's the report here for? If we've got questions, I had a few questions on specific line items, and I'm sorry if I can't ask them. I'll stay hidden in the dark, I guess. My question, I guess, in general, if I may, is on page 18 of the 2 of 3, I guess, Kathy, through you, Mr. Chairman. I know, and correct me here, I believe in 2017, we debentured $19 million, roughly. I'm using round figures. And I spoke with you a week or so ago. That brought our current debt to $65 million. Now, what will be debentured with these projects that you've just canceled, do you think? Like going on page 18 or page 2 of your report, how much of that canceled work or completed work will be debentured? Can you give me any idea on that?
Through the chair, that is a good question. I don't have an exact number for you. I know for this year, the planned debt issue that we're looking at right now is very minimal we won't be possibly issuing debt at this time, and it'll probably be more in 2019. I know a lot of the recommendations, it's generally the larger projects that are debt issued, and you'll notice that a number of these projects are very small in nature. So I would, off the top of my head, I would say it's very minimal. I could get you the exact number, but I don't have it right here with me.
Okay, but the $65 million I referred to, is that inclusive water and sewer and or all capital? That's all capital.
Through the chair, yes, it's all capital, water, wastewater, and the levy supported. Okay,
and the other thing on that, if I remember, and I'm sorry I didn't bring the reports with me, but I recall there was $85 million worth of water and wastewater projects in the queue. Are they all in here? I guess they must be. Am I really on? Because you say in the report that 55% of the budgeted capital projects are water and wastewater, 45% are the other, correct?
Yes, through the chair. I believe when I calculated it, it was approximately $78 million related to water wastewater projects.
Sorry?
There was $78 million worth of capital projects outstanding as December 31st, 2017. That doesn't mean that they're all to be debt financed.
No.
There'll be a variety of different options for funding the projects.
So, sorry, hit me that again. 78 million, though, is that water and wastewater only? Because it was 85. So I'm assuming they dropped off. September 30th, 2017, the last report I looked at had 85 million in the queue, and I forget what was spent. But. Well, yeah, I guess my concern is where our debt might be going.
Through the chair, I'm sorry, my pages aren't numbered. So if you go to the last page of the document, you'll see of the listing.
Yeah.
You'll see projects for water, wastewater that are outstanding as of December 31st, totaling $82.1 million.
Okay, so that's a little less than what it was a while back.
That's correct.
Can you give me any idea how much of that would be borrowed?
So
That's early, I know,
just
but
wondering, did we not, we had a report specific to debt at one time, didn't we not?
no, this is,
No?
I don't
Okay,
think
Go
so.
ahead, Kathy.
I don't think so. I don't remember one just specifically regarding debt. It would have been related to the actual debt issuance of the $19.1 million that we did last time.
Okay.
Sorry, through the chair to Councillor Brunton, my apology.
Yeah.
Again, not off the top of my head, I can't tell you. I
Yeah.
don't have that information with me, but I definitely can get that information, what total of the projects for water, wastewater that are planned to be debt financed. It's easy to, I do have the information, I just don't have it readily available
and
here.
I realize that may change when things roll out and that, but okay.
James, maybe he has more insight?
Well, I don't have a specific answer. I just want to make a general comment. First of all, we made notes on Councillor Brunton's questions, and we think those are really good questions, and we'll definitely include that information on the next capital status report, basically what the count of the canceled projects and so on and so forth, where that involved the funding components with it. Another thing I'd like to say related to debt is the Finance Department, we're currently working on a number of different projects. We're working on reserves right now. We have a DC study underway. We have a debt finance or a capital financing policy coming up in a couple months. And then one of the items that we would like to bring to council as well, as far as an annual report, is a debt report to give you an idea of exactly what we did, what kind of debt is coming up, and so on and so forth. We just don't have the resources to come up with all these great reports at the same time. But I just wanted to let council know that that is on the horizon to bring that kind of information to council.
Okay, and at the same time, if like I'm trying to look at the debt, but also, and I recall when you gave us the 2018 capital budget report, you showed the reserve and reserve funds on a decline for the next 8 to 9 years, and so that money with those projects, does that become debt also? Or if there's no reserve, it's got to be financed someplace, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Brunton, the 10-year capital forecast is constantly changing. So
Right.
we had that comprehensive reserve report last July, and we identified, for example, the roads reserve as well as the capital replacement reserve, some strategies to get that out of the red and into the black within 10 years. We're not done with those 2 or
Right.
3 reserves. We have other ones that we need to work on this year, and then next year we're going to work on other ones. One of them is actually the general building reserve that Councillor Height mentioned earlier. Yes, it is in a negative, but we have to come up with a strategy to get that out of the negative into the positive, and we don't want to compromise current projects as a result. So it's a long-term strategy that we're going to come up with, and having these projects canceled helps us along the way. We're going to redo that 10-year capital list with these projects canceled, and it'll make those numbers a little bit better.
I realize that, and the reason I'm asking those questions is because interest rates are going up, and I assume that as we debenture more in the future, there's going to cost us more. And so your figures you gave us at budget time are going to change, and I would think they're going to change considerably. So, thank you. I'll wait for that information. And I do have one other question, being, if I may, Mr. Chairman, that Shelley's here, and it's to deal with Annalisa Carr Center. I know it says in this report that project has been completed, but we were also looking at that from insurance purposes. Has that gone anywhere?
Through the chair, I'm not familiar with that question, and I'm looking perhaps to Ms. Watson as well about that particular project. I wasn't heavily involved with the Annalise Carr renovations.
It's it was to deal with the air, yeah, and I thought we were looking into some possible litigation on that. That's my...
Marlene, do you have any insight into that?
Through the chair, we did look into it, and the county solicitor advised that there was no no need to proceed or no reason to proceed with it, so that's closed.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Oliver? Okay, so that's my list, unless there's anyone else. Councillor Mayor Luke?
I don't know if I can answer Councillor Brunton's question, but Mr. Chair, when I went through it, I did make note that out of the 214 projects, and as we were told, 138 or something are canceled, completed, but there are 7 projects in here canceled on this 10-year outstanding capital. Councillor Brunton is quite right. There was 19 million in 2017. There was 29 million in the capital budget that was approved for 2016, but of the 7 projects, the total is $825,000 as the numbers are presented here. So it's not a huge amount over 10 years. But at this moment, we've canceled 825. Thank you.
Okay, so is there anyone interested in moving the recommendation in the report? Councillor Oliver? So moved. The seconder, Councillor Sonnenberg. Any further discussion, comments on the recommendation in the report? That's now the motion. Seeing none, those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if Councillor Columbus wants to... I don't know. That's probably not what the rest of them think, but thanks anyway. Okay, so then let's move on to item number 9, staff reports. Item B, staff report DCS 18-50, civic address bylaw revisions. And Chris Baird?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The report before you this afternoon deals with an update to the civic addressing bylaw. The current bylaw has been in place for about 10 years. And over those years, we've had a need to do a bit of housekeeping and tidy things up. The most recent one culminated a few weeks ago when Matt Vaughan presented the cannabis report to council, and we talked about some of the challenges we had where multiple civic addressing was being requested. So that's just one such example. Draw your attention to page 41 or page 1 of the report. There are just a few handful. I'll just hit on them quickly, and then I can answer any questions. The first change is adding more local veterans names for our street name registry. The second one just deals with a bit of cleaning up in terms of where the civic addressing signs begin and end in the rural into urban areas. A new process for addressing trailer parks or mobile home parks and campgrounds, again for emergency services. The next two items, section proposed 4.3 and 4.5 deal with those seeking additional or multiple civic addresses on a property, and those that, if they have been issued, a clear direction that they can be removed or withdrawn. The final two relate to the request for street name changes. And we do on occasion, maybe once every year or every couple of years, we get a petition from usually a group of residents that seek a name change to their roads. So before it used to be 51%, we're recommending it go up to a minimum of 80%. There is obviously inconvenience to those. So we want to make sure that the majority of those landowners, those residents impacted by an address change are in support. And then the final section, again, deals with allowing developers the option to choose 50% of their new street names in a new development while using 50% from our street name registry. And again, that takes into consideration local history, those veterans' names and points of interest that would relate to perhaps flora and fauna here in Norfolk County. With that, we've attached the existing bylaw. I know Councillor Oliver prefers the track changes document. I always think of him. But in this particular case, we provided you both the existing bylaw and the new proposed so that can be read in its entirety. So with that, I'm glad to answer any questions.
Questions from committee. Councillor Wells.
Very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I have a general question about name civic addresses. Could I ask a general question, which may not necessarily be in this report, but it's a general question?
Go ahead.
My question is pretty simple, and it's to Mr. Baird. Mr. Baird, at one time when we were dealing with civic addresses, we talked about Bill's Corners and Bill's Corners. One has an apostrophe S, one doesn't have. Has it ever risen its head as a problem, to the best of your knowledge?
To the best of my knowledge, that's a great question because that whole exercise was about removing duplication. But in our 911 database, Bill's apostrophe S corner and Bill's corner without the apostrophe are both distinct. And we have, to my knowledge, not had any problem. Again, it's not just the name of the community, it's the road name in which that property is on, and it is also a distinct number range. So I know our GIS staff have done a great job trying to create distinct properties throughout the county.
Well, Mr. Chair, if we're not having any problems, I'm not looking for any problems. Thank you.
Mayor Luke, did I see your hand, or Councillor Columbus?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You talk about a street name registry, Chris. Where is that list? Has it ever been provided to council?
The street name registry list is one that's maintained by our GIS staff. It's quite lengthy, but it's not appended here, but I would certainly be able to email it to you for your interest to see what sorts of names are indeed on that list.
Great.
I'll take that upon myself to do.
You can send it to all of us, I guess.
Yes, of course.
Thank you for that.
Thanks. And Councillor Sonnenberg. And Mayor Luke?
Chris, does vacant farmland, farms without buildings on them, have a civic address?
Through the chair, we generally like to have a building permit or a building or structure on that, on those locations so that we can assign a number because it is, they're all generally assigned on a mathematical distance along the roadway so that they make sense whenever there's infill and the like. There is a new a proposal being tabled in the province. I believe it's called Rachel's Law or something to that effect that deals with the agriculture community. And as I understand it, there was a young child that was injured in a farm equipment rollover. And the challenge is for emergency services to come to that site. It's very hard to describe your location in a rural area, you know, between this concession, that concession, as opposed to a definitive address. So we're monitoring that. We can see that being somewhat, it's a great idea, but it would also be problematic because you could imagine the number of, how often would we put civic addresses, you know, is it every acre or every half a kilometer of roadway? So we're seeing what other rural farming communities are doing. But as it stands right now, we generally don't issue a civic address unless there is a noted need, and primarily if there's an entrance, a culvert, a cross culvert, an entry point that can be physically defined. So,
Well, the reason for my question is, you know, farmers rent land all over the place, and they could be combining or plowing on a field or a farm that doesn't have a civic address, and their combine catches on fire. Where do you send the fire trucks? So I think any vacant land, as long as it has a driveway, should have a civic address. So anyway, you're looking
that's
into
an excellent point, Mr. Chairman. I'll take it up with my staff, and we'll keep that in mind going forward.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Mayor Luke?
So that's something that's... Mr. Chair, I want to move the recommendation in this report.
And seconder, Councillor Brunton. Any further comments? Those comments, Mayor Luke?
Yeah, I was very pleased to see that this has been 11 years since, Councillor Black, you can remember our former clerk and deputy clerk signed the task of 911 numbers and people having to change because we couldn't have two main streets in any two urban areas and all the headaches. But I was pleased to see this update. And the other thing I wanted to just mention, through you to Mr. Barrett, I'm not sure who's responsible, but I really enjoyed reading the part where developers have the right to choose 50% of their names that they, for some reason, want, but the compromise is we have a lot of significant names in the county that we would like to see out in the public. And so that is just an excellent compromise. Thank you.
Okay, anything further? Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. We'll move on to our next staff report. It's item C, Staff Report DCS 1854. And is that you as well, Chris?
It is, Mr. Chairman, thanks. This is the first of two reports I'll do right after. This deals with an application for the part lot control. So the first report that is before you tonight deals with row townhomes located in Port Dover on Brown Street. And these are homes, obviously, that are joined, and as part of the conveyance, the ability to convey individual properties, we go through this process called exemption from part lot control. It helps to avoid the need for individual severances. So that's the report. I'm glad to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions from committee members? Councillor Height?
Move the recommendation.
Okay, seconder, Councillor Wells. Any further comments? Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you, Chris. And on to the next one, which I believe is yours, the staff report DCS 1855, Ed Robinson Homes.
Yep, page 73, Mr. Chairman. It's exactly the same thing. This relates to a duplex dwelling located in urban Port Dover on St. George Street. There's two dwelling units, and we want to separate them so they can be conveyed to the two new owners. Same as last. We're here for any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Columbus?
I'll move the recommendation.
Moves the recommendation. Councillor Wells seconds it. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. And we've dealt with the renovation and usage. On to item F, staff report CAO, Chief Administrative Officer, 1818, regarding an application for a taxi cab ownership license. David? Or is that Stephanie? Stephanie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to committee. This is a pretty standard application report that we receive for a taxi owner's license, and this one in specific is for Y-Weight Taxi and Delivery. Staff notified the various taxi cab companies that we do have in Norfolk County currently licensed, and we did not receive any verbal and/or written comments on the application itself. I do want to note that at the time of writing this staff report, we did have 8 companies and 34 vehicles that were currently licensed through the county, but because our deadline for licensing is April 15th of each year, and that has since passed, I do have an update. We do have 7 companies and 24 vehicles that are licensed, and that is because there is one company that did not submit their license application. Also to note that is of importance is that Y-Weight Taxi and Delivery has been licensed in the past, but that company has since turned hands and turned ownership, and there was not a current license issued by the county. So when the new owners, Mr. Proctor and Mr. LaFond, who I believe are here this afternoon, when they took over the company, they needed to, because of our bylaw, submit an application, and that requires approval from council. So that's why we're doing this standard application. If approval is given, all companies are required to provide council services department, more specifically our licensing area, with the required documents that are outlined within the bylaw. Staff see no issues or concerns with this taxi cab owner's license, and therefore we are recommending the license be approved. And with that, I can respond to any questions of committee.
Questions from committee members? Councillor Brunton? Oliver then?
Yeah, I don't have any problems with the report. My question is, are there any, what's the word, Uber services available anywhere? The reason I ask that, I think I read somewhere where somebody locally is providing, or looking at providing that service.
Through the chair, I can start, and I think Marlene wants to add to that. I'm not 100% sure if we do have Uber. We do not license Uber.
Marlene?
So through the chair, through our Haldeman Advisory Committee, it was brought up there that Haldeman was exploring a pilot for Uber, and at this point I believe it's still under investigation and a potential future pilot.
And is that for taxi service or is that for a bus service?
Through the chair, I understand it to be for a taxi service, and it's from a pilot that's being, I believe, trialed out in Ingersoll, and they're looking at that for consideration in Haldeman.
Thank you.
Councillor Oliver?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine isn't a question, but it is a comment, and I'm even more anxious to make the comment now that I see the applicants are here. In their letter, I see they indicated their intention, or they have purchased 2 Toyota Prius, which is the hybrid vehicle, and I think that's terrific. I think these would be the first hybrid taxi vehicles operating within our county. I don't know whether staff can comment, and they don't need to if they don't, but I'm pleased and I congratulate the applicants using
Stephanie could respond to that.
Thank you.
Thank you through the chair. So I don't know specifically the cab cars that we do have, but we do have, the requirement in our bylaw is that there's various features that the car has to have or the vehicle has to have. One has to be less than 10 years old, sorry. But we do have a lot of, and I've noticed myself, a lot of our cab companies that are on the road right now we're starting to see that turnover. So starting to see some of the newer vehicles out there clean, well put together, and safe for our patrons that are using them. So we do have Toyota Camrys that are, I think that's through our courtesy cab. And as mentioned, with this staff report, we do have the hybrid vehicles.
Okay, Councillor Oliver. Okay, Councillor Geisens, then Mayor Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move the recommendation on page 95. There may be some other questions, but I thought I'd put it on the table anyway.
Okay, and the seconder, Mayor Luke, and then speaking to it. Councillor Geisens, do you want to speak to it now that we have a seconder?
Well, I'm happy with what they're doing, and I know that the mayor wants some questions, so I have no problem. Thank you.
Okay, Mayor Luke.
I don't have any problem either. Back to the letter from Mr. Proctor on March the 6th. It's on page 98, along with what the point that Councillor Oliver brought up about the hybrid car. I was very, very pleased to see that they're saying they're getting requests for taxis more and more in the Cortland, Langton, and Delhi, which I think is a good all the way around, and so that I was pleased to see that. And then secondly, this company is currently going from 5 a.m. on most days to 3 a.m. And they go on further to say that they are working towards a round-the-clock 24-hour operation. Don't you guys ever sleep? So what I'm saying is, this is progress, and this is a business that is saying we'd like to come in and provide the service. So my hats are off to this.
Okay, and
Thank you.
Councillor Columbus.
Yes, I just wanted to say, we're talking about hybrid vehicles. I know that Delhi Cabs has several electric-powered vehicles, hybrid vehicles, things.
Okay, so the motion is to approve the new taxi cab license for Y-Wait Taxi and Delivery Service. Those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. And moving on to, you're welcome. Good luck. We're on to item number 10.
We don't have anything now.
Okay, so we're moving into closed session now? Yeah. Okay, we're all the way down to number 12, closed session. So I need a mover to go in camera. Councillor Brunton and Councillor Wells, those in favor. And that's happening at 4:23. And I guess I better read this, as the boss told me. The committee moved into closed session at 4:23 to discuss matters pursuant to Section 239, the Municipal Act as amended. The subject matter pertains to personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board, labor relations or employee negotiations, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We're off in camera. Do we have any idea how long we might be? Sorry, David. It could be a half an hour or so.